How's it going, everybody? Welcome your faces back to another Satoshi Club video, and I wanted to ask you how many of you have actually heard of John McAfee and his antivirus program and his rants on Twitter about cryptocurrencies. So for those of you that don't know, McAfee was very active back in 2017, 2018 in the whole crypto world, tweeting, pumping and dumping coins, doing a lot of stuff very similar to today's Elon Musk, but unfortunately, he was indicted on cryptocurrency fraud charges, and he did go to prison at some point, and he did end up, committing suicide. So let's just take a little look at the wild life of John McAfee. Let's see what this guy actually did throughout his life, because it is a really interesting story, and potentially you can learn something new from it. So let's get straight into it. He is a cybersecurity legend, as he is now an infamous media story. He created one of the world's most popular antivirus programs in the 1980s, but he later became embroiled in a world of drugs, alcohol, and crime, which ultimately led to his demise. He was an enigma of a person. First of all, he built one of the biggest antivirus companies to date, cementing himself in the tech world as a cybersecurity pioneer. He amassed a $100 million fortune that dwindled to $4 million after the 2008 financial crisis. And also, unfortunately, he became a person of interest in a Belizean murder. He evaded authorities and later returned to the US to run in 2 presidential elections. Wow, okay? He was charged with tax evasion in late 2020 and died in July 2021 in a Spanish prison. Now, McAfee was actually born in the UK on September 18th, 1945. His parents moved to Virginia when he was young. He told Wired that his father was an alcoholic and was abusive towards his mother. And when he was 15, his father died by suicide. So McAfee said that every day he wakes up with his father in his thoughts. He went to Roanoke College, or Roanoke College. He was a shrewd entrepreneur at the start and launched his first business selling magazines. The issues were free, but customers had to pay for the shipping and handling fees. He said that he made a fortune from selling these magazines, and he explained to them why it's not free and why they're going to pay for it, and it all worked, right? So confidence is key is the first thing that he actually came across when it comes to selling these magazines. So that is something that you should keep in mind for later, and that is a lesson we can learn from John McAfee. Now, in his first year at Roanoke, he began to drink heavily, and he spent much of his magazine business income on alcohol, which, was not really a good thing, but okay. He started to earn his PhD in mathematics at Northeast Louisiana State College in 1968. However, he was kicked out for starting a relationship with one of his undergraduate students, a student that he later married, whose name is unknown, so nothing from that PhD. But in the late 60s, he began working at a company that coded punch card systems in the late 60s. That taught him the basics of early computing, and he landed a job at Missouri Pacific Railroad, where he helped the company use a newfangled IBM computer system to help calibrate train schedules. Now, he started dabbling into some drugs while working at the company. He told Wired that he would work often while tripping on acid. So one day, he sold a bag of psychedelic known as DMT, and after not feeling the effects after consuming a small portion, he partook in the entire bag, and within an hour his entire mind was shattered. So then he decided to move to Silicon Valley in the 1970s. Now, he held numerous jobs at various tech companies including NASA, General Electric, and Xerox, and continued to abuse alcohol and drugs, but it wasn't until 1983 that he got fully sober, and he started working at the company Omex and found that his daily routine to be snorting and drinking a bottle of scotch all the time was not really the best. But he says he felt alone and he felt scared, and he finally decided to seek help at AA. So McAfee was working at Lockheed by the 1980s. Computers were still relatively new at the time, and in 1986, the first computer virus hit PCs, and McAfee read about these new programs that infiltrated computers and decided to start his own company to identify ways to combat the intrusive software. So in the 1980s, he discovered viruses, and he opened up McAfee Associates, which was an antivirus company that a lot of you probably still know about today. Now, by the end of the 1980s, the company was making around $5 million a year, and some of the biggest companies in the world were using his antivirus platform, and this is McAfee himself. He grew even more successful in part because of a computer virus called Michelangelo that hit the scene in 1992, and McAfee called it one of the worst viruses to date, estimating it would infect as many as 5 million computers, And at the time, since antivirus platforms weren't products that most people bought, Michelangelo and McAfee's antidote for it changed that, and he made an absolute fortune from this company, right? He resigned from McAfee in 1994, and 2 years later, he sold his shares, which gave him about $100 million, according to the New York Times. After his resignation, McAfee kept a relatively low profile. He would give young startups advice, lecture at the Stanford Graduate School of Business, and also work projects on his own. But he kicked off 2 social media initiatives and they both pretty much failed. And he also divorced his wife later on. So later on in 2000, he bought a lot of acres in Colorado and built a yoga retreat, where he also bought a lot of acres in New Mexico and founded a flight club called the Sky Gypsies. Basically, it all caught up to him, right? He spent a lot of money on this spiritual direction, on yoga, and this economic collapse caused him to basically shrink his fortune from $100 million to just $4 million in 2008. So he auctioned off much of his real estate holdings, and in 2010, Intel bought McAfee Associates for $7.7 billion. So had McAfee actually held it, he probably would have made more money, but he decided to move to Belize's Ambergris Cay that year, and he bought an oceanfront estate to kickstart a project devoted to curing a kind of bacteria per BBC, but the operation began to fall apart after the microbiologist he teamed up with absolutely quit. Then, in April of 2012, the Belize police raided the research lab over suspected meth production, where McAfee claimed it was because the government was corrupt. So he declined to make a $2 million political donation, and they raided his bacteria lab, or whatever he was doing back then. But McAfee's neighbor, so this is where stuff starts to get a little bit more serious, was found dead in November 2012. And living next to McAfee in Belize was this American guy called George Fall. He was found dead by a gunshot late in 2012, and McAfee later acknowledged to the BBC that the two may not have always gotten along. So, as he was a person of interest in Fall's death, and when the authorities came to question him, he fled back to the US and claimed that the government intended to silence him. So he thought that maybe they were coming for him. They mistook him for me. They got the wrong house and he's dead. They killed him. It spooked me out. So they were maybe supposed to kill McAfee instead. But, you have to understand that McAfee was a drug abuser. So you can't really trust all the words that he's saying. So there isn't a lot of credibility out of what he's saying. But let's just keep moving on with the story at this point. ABC News soon after reported that a month before his death, Fall filed a complaint against McAfee. It accused him of failing to contain his 8 to 12 vicious dogs that were allegedly attacking residents and tourists. And 2 of the dogs were fed a poisoned tortilla the day before Fall died. So it was pretty suspicious, and McAfee was actually a big suspect in this guy's death, right? But he also said in the entire 5 years he was there, he said maybe 15 words to his neighbor. Later on, McAfee gets arrested in Guatemala. This reportedly could have been because of Vice, which flew down 2 reporters to interview him, and by mistake, Vice posted pictures of McAfee that still had GPS coordinates attached to them. So shortly after, Guatemalan police caught up with McAfee, arresting him on charges of illegal entry to the country. So while detained, he was taken to the hospital after a series of heart-related health issues, and later on, he spent his time running from Belize to Guatemala, and it's featured in Running with the Devil, The Wild World of John McAfee, footage of which part was filmed by Vice journalists. So he was in a staple of national headlines from that point on. In 2013, he uploaded a video entitled How to Uninstall McAfee Antivirus. Okay. It showed him surrounded by scantily clad women while trying to uninstall the software he invented, which he denounced after leaving the company. He, surprisingly wasn't in prison just yet. And this documentary, Running with the Devil, The Wild World of John McAfee, also says in the program that McAfee claimed to have bought a yacht from Wolf of Wall Street, John Belfort, at some point. But he just continued doing his thing. In 2015, he became CEO of the tech investment firm NGT Capital, per The Guardian, and then he ran for the US presidential election. So how he got out of all of this trouble with the Guatemalan police, nobody knows, But he campaigned as a libertarian and went on to shows like Larry King Live to promote his cause, first that year and again for the 2020 election. And his slogan was, "Here's to the crazy ones," per the New York Times. He lost both times quite drastically, and he also became a vocal cryptocurrency enthusiast. So he now famously said in 2017 that it would eat his thing alive on live television if the price of Bitcoin didn't reach $1 million by the end of 2020. So, well, I don't want to say luckily, but he did end up dying, so he couldn't fulfill his promise. But McAfee used Twitter often to post about his crypto moves. He ranted a lot, and the US Justice Department indicted McAfee on June 15, 2020, alleging tax evasion and willful failure to file tax returns for millions of income that he earned via speaking engagements and other crypto-related projects. So he pumped a lot of coins, he made a lot of money, and then he didn't pay taxes on it. So he was arrested in Spain in October that year, the day that indictment was unsealed, and the day after the Securities and Exchange Commission charged him for promoting initial coin offerings or ICOs back in the ICO craze without disclosing to his followers that he was being paid $23 million to post about them, per the New York Times. And in July 2021, Spain ruled to extradite him to the US. He was found dead in his cell hours later. And that is how we conclude the story of John McAfee. So the new Netflix documentary follows him from Belize to Guatemala and in the years after. So if you want to check that out, you are able to do so on Netflix. And that's it for today's video. I hope this was a pretty interesting story for you all. Make sure to drop a like, subscribe to the channel, comment down below with your favorite thoughts, and I will see you all in the next video.